Today I'm talking with Glyne, who is a self-pres 7 like me and an ENTP about creativity. What could be better?
Mm,
What could be better?
nothing. Nothing.
Nothing. So tell me, what does creativity mean to you?
Oh, such a good question. I think for me, creativity is expansive space. It's getting to play in areas of the unknown. It's getting to, yeah, I think the word play comes up to me for me a lot when I think of creativity and what it means. It's just really exploring, um, kind of exploring new things, but also just even kind of seeing where you can take old things. Like, what can you do to, take something in a new direction, whether that's a conversation or, piece of work or, even art or whatever it might be. So creativity to me is a very broad kind of definition.
So play, exploring, and finding something new in the old. And so
Hmm.
do you have a particular creative practice? Because I know you work in sort of that leadership development space, which I want to talk to you more about as well. But like, how does it feel when you're creating?
Mm. I think for me, when I have the opportunity to create, well, let me step back. I feel like I need to be creating all the time. Like, I think I am constantly in search of something to try and do. So I think if I think about my life, in the work world, that means the expression, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I'm kind of the other way. It's like, if it's not broken, break it and try something else. Do something different. Question it. Why is it, why do we have to keep doing this the way we're doing it? So I think for me, creativity in the business space really applies to looking at things and saying, that's being done that way. What if we tried something completely different? And then personally, it's probably maybe how other people would define creativity. I find that interesting too. Like, when you talk to people about what is creativity, that question, I think people often go to like drawing or painting or, music, or, we go to those spaces. And I have that side of me. I mean, once upon a time, I was supposed to be an illustrator, right? I was supposed to um, go to illustration school and become an illustrator for advertising. And what was interesting in the experience about that for me was only having one mode of creativity, drawing, wasn't creative enough for me. So I switched out of that and switched over to advertising because I could still do the creative stuff. I could still have dabble my fingers in that, but I also got to write and I got to do other things like problem solving, creative problem solving, and things like that, which, going down the traditional, illustration route wasn't giving me. So I think for me, when I'm in those modes, I feel very much in flow. That's the time when I'm doing work like that. Time just, you're in the zone. Time goes so quickly. And I think I find creativity for me is also more of a collective process. Like, I like to be around other people for a stretch of it. And then I'll often like to kind of hunker away and then dig in a little bit more and then bring it back to people. So I find for me, creativity is very collaborative, which is probably why illustration for me was not the right mode of channeling my creativity. So yeah, I think the feelings of just yeah, I don't know. I think the word that comes to mind for me is just pure joy. Like, it's just joyful for me to be able to create and brainstorm and come up with ideas and you know look at other possibilities and solutions, whether it's with clients or colleagues or my
Mm.
husband.
The thing that I'm really curious about at the moment is what you said about one mode of creating was not enough for you.
Mm,
Because when I think back to why I left law at the time, I said it wasn't creative enough for me because I looked ahead, climbing that ladder, you're basically doing the same thing for the rest of your career.
right.
But for some people, law is a very creative process in the way you're
Yeah.
problem solving and writing briefs and going to court and all that stuff. But for me, I just couldn't see the creativity in it. And so
Mm,
I'm wondering now if it was this similar thing, is it was just one mode and that wasn't diverse enough for me.
yeah. I certainly feel that. I feel like I have a very short attention span. I don't know if I'd like to see what the levels of ADHD are with sevens, compared to the other the other numbers. Maybe you know that, but I do feel like I need a lot of variety. I think that's just a huge part of who I am. And so if I do anything for a prolonged period of time, I lose interest. Like when I left, I was in illustration school for a year. And I would say, I would characterize it as when I left, I was burnt out. I characterize myself as being burnt out from just being very intensely focused on, all aspects of drawing. And I didn't pick up a pencil again for 7 years after I left. I touched nothing. I didn't do any art whatsoever. And then when I picked it up again, it was just this reinvigoration and a reminder of actually how much I loved it. But it was almost like for me having too much of a good thing took the joy away from it, right? So it was I feel like that, and that's what I found about, for me, creativity. It's a little bit of needing to kind of keep a certain amount of variety in the things that I do. If I'm doing the same thing over and over again, it stops feeling creative. It starts to feel more like a chore. And then I
Mm,
interest, right?
yeah, no, that makes sense. So when you're, in the workplace doing leadership development based stuff, because you mentioned business related creativity sort of being in that problem solving. And I love the phrase you said, if it's working, let's break it. Because
Yeah.
when I was in my early stages of my career and people would say, if it's not broken, don't try and fix it,
Yeah.
because I was trying to change everything and that
Yeah.
was too overwhelming. And I had to figure out actually which projects do you prioritize? Because
Yeah.
actually trying to change everything isn't sustainable for you or for the organization.
Yeah.
And I learned to look at some projects and go, is that working well enough? Is that good enough for wherever it is, in the scheme of things? And so some things that were working, I left. And obviously there's times when some things are working, you still need to break them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you're doing, leadership development work, what is that like in terms of creativity for you?
Yeah. So when I started my firm, I had worked for another consultancy that did leadership development work, and I used to say we used to do everything from soup to nuts, right? So we do assessments, and then we do, all the way down to like classroom training. And I had been a trainer before, in the classroom, and I realized very early on I didn't want to do that as a profession because, when training, you learn the program, you go deliver it, and then you deliver it to another audience and another audience and another audience. The same content. The people are different. Some of the conversations are a little different, but you're pushing everybody through the same type of thing. I got my coaching certificate in early 2000s, and I started to really kind of enjoy the one-to-one aspect of coaching. So that was a new learning for me. So I like the creativity of that. But then at the time, was sort of thinking like, boy, when it comes to leadership development, the choices really at that time were go to a class and sit in a class for 1, 2, 3 days, or hire an executive coach and work with them one-on-one. Or there was these team activities where you'd go and do trust falls and you do this sort of like team building. Let's all go cook together and then we'll learn lessons about how we showed up in the kitchen. And I really felt like I was just putting pieces together. I was seeing what was happening in the market. I was observing, coaching was really taking off, but I would often find myself with my coachees saying, you know what, you need a mentor. You need to be part of a group with other people, who are dealing with similar issues. And so I started getting really curious about all these CEO groups, because at the time, that's all there was, were these CEO groups that were around. And now there's a plethora of all these kinds of things. But back in, 2000, 2001, it was primarily for presidents of companies or business owners. And I just started thinking like, what about mid-career leaders? What about people who are in the middle of the organization, mid-career, and particularly I got very fixated on type A personality, high potential leaders, because I'd been a high potential. I'd moved through organizations very, very quickly. And so I think for me, when I went to launch my business, and it took me about a year to figure it out what I was exactly trying to do, I really saw that I was creating something different in the marketplace. I didn't want to just go out and do a leadership development program. I didn't want to just go out and do a coaching offering. I came out with a group coaching company that was community based. So it looked like a not for profit, but it was a for profit. And it was sort of this design of which was really built around this idea of leaders teaching leaders, and on a coaching platform. And so now group coaching has kind of gone a little bit more mainstream, and now team coaching is going more mainstream. But if you peel under the covers of our firm, we really, do a couple of things very well, but we have iterations of, the first core program that I designed. We now have 3 group programs, but they're all kind of spin-offs of that. And the creativity for me was coming into like seeing that program through and designing a program that I wouldn't get bored delivering it. And
Mm,
it's almost worked, because coaching, you're always able to pivot, and every clinic that we deliver with a client is a little bit different because of the group. But I needed to have something where it gave me a lot of freedom and flexibility to play within. And so that I think, when I think about just coming into the leadership space, it's such a crowded market, as you know. Like, I mean, there's so many great providers out there and people doing unique things. But I just needed to kind of carve something different. And I think a lot of people, because there's a lot of sameness in our industry. And at first people say, oh, the round table, what's that? But then when they get under the covers of what they do, they go, well, this is really different.
mm,
This is really unique. And I think that's just because that's how my brain is wired. Like I couldn't sort of wrap my head around the idea of doing something that had already been done. I felt like there was a gap in terms of how we were supporting leaders. And then as a result of that, what could we do to better close that gap with impact, right? And that became my driving kind of, how do I play with
mm,
this idea? Could I do something? Would it work? It didn't work. And you need clients that'll play with you in that space, and I think that for me, again, going back to, for me, creativity is a very collaborative process. So, I was fortunate in that I had clients that could kind of see what I was envisioning in the early days, and then be willing to go, yeah, what the heck, let's give this a try and see what happens. And then the outcome surprised both of us, really, because
mm,
we were testing and trialing and doing things together. And you don't always have an opportunity to do that. Like, there's a bit of a thing, I think, in leadership consulting that, well, I'm hiring you because you're the expert and you're going to come and you're going to tell our leaders what to do. So it was a bit of a different mode, even in sales, to go in and say, let's co-create this together. Like, I've got frameworks, but I want to figure out how's it going to work for you, right? And designing it in a partnership. So did I answer that
mm.
question? I feel like I went very 70 all over the place on you there.
Oh no, that's perfect. That's perfect. So this thing I want to shout out here is the designing something that I don't get bored delivering, because I feel
Yeah,
this is a challenge I face all the time in the workspace. And we hear the message a lot: to be successful in business, you have to take one thing and do it consistently and do it
yes,
again, make it
yes,
repeatable,
yeah,
just file it out there, like the classroom teaching that you were talking about. I hear you,
yeah,
I've done that, I know what you're talking about. And I think it's important to say you can be successful by designing something that is always different in some way.
hmm
Um, Not
hmm
just different once and repeatably different, but there is still, how do we make sure that it is different all the time?
hmm
And that being part of the offering, like this, I'm not coming in as the expert, I'm coming in as the guide. And there's a sort of a process to follow, but we're essentially co-creating the outcome, not setting up some principles as to what we're going to achieve over this time. I think
hmm
Really important for sevens who are struggling with that to give themselves permission to go, that's not just what you need, that's okay. And you can be successful following that particular type of creative process.
Yeah, and I think too often, I think as a seven, what I've come to sort of, appreciate about myself, but also learn about it. It's like anything, right? Like we talk to our clients all the time, but your greatest strength also contains your greatest liability. And I think the great strength for me is that ability to connect dots, synthesize information, and come up with a concept, right? And then I can execute the first round, but then after that, I do start getting bored. I mean, I have our anchor program, our signature program was the first one I launched. It's now coming up on, 15 years that it's been out in the market. And I don't deliver it very often. I have one legacy client that I deliver it to, which keeps it fresh enough for me because I'm not delivering it all the time. And I scaled it to the point that, I've scaled my business to the point that I have other people that can come in and do the delivery and take the program into other clients. Other programs that there's one program that we have that I'd actually never delivered it. I conceptualized it and then I had somebody else take it and run with it. And I've been more behind the scenes as we've kind of come up on iterations to continue to help tweak it. And I think often I'll bump into people, and I know I have a couple of seven friends who are entrepreneurs and in the same space I'm in, and they're never able to scale their businesses. And they always say, Glenn, what's the secret? What's the secret? How do you do it? I've said to them, like, you do at some point, if you want to scale, you have to standardize, like you just do. And so whether you're the one that's going to continue to do it or you standardize it and allow other people to come in and bring their own flavor to it so that you can step out and let go. But I know if I was a me, myself, and I shop, I think I'd just be creating new stuff all the time because I think there's nothing wrong with that. Like I think that can be a really great way to have like a thriving practice. But I think often, and maybe it's, sevens, we want to have it all. We think we got this great program, we want everybody to have it. It's just like, know that you're going to have to sacrifice some of your creativity to do that. Because if you want to really build it out, you know, you're going to have to let go of, the innate need to want to try something new or change or bring that edge to the work all the time. I mean, I had a big aha last summer. I took 2 months off. I took a sabbatical and I was feeling, I won't use the word burnt out. I think but I was feeling really disengaged from my business. I was really kind of fed up and bored. We'd come through and I was sort of chalking it up to COVID and the fact that it had been really, intense getting the firm through COVID. And we kind of come out the other end. And I took 2 months and the first month I literally did nothing. I was like, I was not checking email. I was not checking in with my team. I was on Vancouver Island, basically walking laps around Victoria. And I then came back to Ontario and spent another month in Ontario doing little bits here and there. And then when I came back into the office, my revelation as I sort of came back in was I needed to inject more creativity into my work because I had been for the last probably 3 to 4 years so focused on standardization in order to scale the business and also the routine of bringing clients in and selling the projects and all of that stuff that you do. I said to my head of programming, I said, I know you were planning on doing that pilot for this new program, but I'm going to take it over and do it. I need this for myself. And so I stepped in to do a pilot of a new program that we were playing around with. And it was just good for me to be back in there thinking about how to make things work. It just was a great way to re-energize. But I can't stay there, right? For the business, I
Mm.
have to pull myself back out again. And so that's what that's always the fight for me. And I think when I can get to the point where I'm in my own business, really being able to be creative with the business, creative with the marketing and the sales and the big product design. Um, that's where I need to be when I get too in the weeds of the work that we're doing and the day to day. My husband always says, "Oh, you've got your own business. You should be in a perpetual state of bliss." And I'm like, that's not how it works. Like there's always going to be parts of your job that you don't love, even when you designed your own shop. But that was such a
Mm,
big aha for me.
yeah.
I really delegated too much of my creativity to other members of my team, and I had spent too much of my energy on standardizing, which even say
Yeah.
too much, like, ugh.
And I like how you can find creativity in different parts of the business. So delivering a new
Mm,
program, sales and marketing, because there's
yeah,
going to be standardization to all of it, but there's
yeah,
also creativity needed in all of it. And it's finding that balance. And as you say, as a seven, no matter what work you're doing, you need to find a balance between the two, because if you're creative all the time, you might end up undermining your business.
mhm.
And so it's, yeah. Uh, so I'm curious, once you discovered that you were a self-pres seven, how did that change either your personal creative practice or how you were at work with the business? Like what shifted for you?
Well, I think finding out that I was a self-pressed seven and I mean, I think the big aha I had was around the need for me to make sure I had some form of creativity going on at work. Like it was just, I spend a lot of my time at work. And I think the other thing too is to really kind of I gave myself more permission to start to think about reigniting some things that I used to do outside of work. So for years and years, I always had, whether I was taking a pottery class or I was taking a painting class or I was taking something that was non work related. And I'd kind of gotten, again, with COVID, I'd sort of let go of all of that and it did not come back. So I think really sort of had I think the self-preservation seven, understanding that and understanding for me how critical it is to make sure that I'm keeping that as a very intentional part of both, not just my work life, but my personal life, um, was really eye-opening because I think your mood, it affects your mood when you're not in alignment. Like it affects your mental health, it affects your relationships because you're really not happy. Or
Mm,
I wasn't happy in my core. And then you start, I don't know, for me, I start taking it out on the people closest to me probably, and not being such a ball of light to hang out with. um yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing.
I think one of the things I realized, and I don't think it was through the Enneagram, I think it was just through trial and error and trying to design my life,
Mhm.
was that I needed creativity in work and home life. Like it was like I needed it
Mhm.
everywhere,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's still something I almost felt like I had to design or make space for. It didn't feel like it was just happening naturally. It still needed to be there. Was an intentionality that I still required to bring to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
interesting to
agree with
hear that
that.
too.
No, I think that intentionality is really important because life is busy, and I think too, and I don't know if for me this is another other aspect of being a seven, I guess, is that in the kind of work that I do, it's very social work, and so you get out, you get invited to things, and you're out doing things with other people, and going to awards, and you're going to conferences, and you're going here, and you're going there, and so it's so easy to sort of just get sucked into all of those kinds of things, which bring a certain degree of creativity, right? Into, hearing people talk about things in a different way. It lights up ideas and things like that, which is all great. But I do think for me, like the outlet, like it's interesting to hear you say you paint. Like I do feel like having that more tactile way of expressing creativity is yeah, it's an important part. As we're talking, I'm thinking creativity and variety are very closely connected for me.
Mm.
Um,
You mentioned that, that when you were burnt out from your illustrative work and then when you were sort of semi burnt out and disengaged from work. And I'm wondering if you would define those as creative blocks, or,
Hmm.
if not, what would your experience of working with creative blocks, either small ones or large ones, what's that like for you, and how do you get through it?
Hmm. I'm not sure if I would characterize the burnout as a creative block. Like, I feel like for me, it's almost like my enthusiasm for projects is really intense. And then once I figured it out, I'm kind of done with it. Like, I need to move on. And so even if there's still little things to be doing, once I can see the big picture of something and I know what it's almost like once I know what the end chapter is going to look like, I'm ready to go on to the next thing. It's really hard for me to close things off. I'm the person with partial degrees, partial certificates all over the place. Like, that is me. And I was thinking about that the other day, actually. I'm like, what is that? Like, is that about, what's the fear underneath that? Like, are you not pushing things over the finish line and da da da? But I feel like that's that. So it's not so much it was a creative block as I just think I just got bored and I'm done with it and I just want to move on. I have experienced though creative blocks for sure, and mostly with writing. Like, I will writing for me, it either comes to me really fast and I know exactly what I want to write about, or it's if I'm told I need to write an article. Yeah, okay. So here's the thing. Creativity on demand, like blank slate creativity, is very hard for me. So
Mm.
that was what I found hard about being an illustrator. Was it was like, okay, here's this blank slate, you come up with an illustration. I feel like where my creativity comes is when I see something, I go, oh, have you thought about making it better this way? So when I paint, for example, I usually go off another picture and then I'll put my twist on it. I
Right.
don't freestyle painting, right? Or pottery. Like, it's usually, I remember years ago, I was in a pottery class, and there's in England, there are these like leaf like men that are in the buildings, like their faces are made of leaves. And I just really liked that look. And so I decided to do my own mask with the leaf. And I can remember the pottery teacher was like, this is so creative. Oh my goodness. I did it slightly differently than the usual way of, kind of a leaf man would be. And that's me. Like, I think I'm not going to come up with the idea of making a face out of leaves, but I could look at a face of leaves and go, oh, that's interesting, but I might do it this way. And I think that iterative creativity is really where my strength sits. So creative blocks happen to me
Mm.
usually when I don't have something to anchor off of. So if I think about, when I'm writing posts on LinkedIn, I'm often reacting to something I've experienced or I've seen, or somebody else has been talking about, and just think about it in maybe like a different way.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. I definitely find it easier to come up with new ideas when I'm bouncing off something.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah. I
that
think
bounce seems key.
yeah, and it seems, which is funny because I think I used to when I was younger think, well, I'm not that creative because I'm not coming up with these like brand new ideas and brand new concepts. Like, even the idea of like what I did with my business. It's not like I invented group coaching and this idea of peer-based learning. I looked at CEO groups and said, why couldn't we have that for mid-career leaders? And then I
Mm.
went to figure out like what would have to be different for it to work with mid-career leaders, because they're a different audience, they have different constraints, they have different things. Companies are going to pay. So there's a whole bunch of problems I had to solve around that, which I, figured out. But it's not like the idea was this, wow, radical. This we've never heard of this notion of peer groups for leaders before, right? Um,
Mm.
so that for sure is me. It's much easier to jump off things than to start from zero.
Yeah. So I feel like we've heard quite a few things that support you to be creative. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned that stands out?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I think about with creativity is this problem to be solved for, right? Like I love it when it's something um that's probably when I get probably the most juice out of creativity is that creative problem solving. I especially love it if people think that it can't be done, then I'm gonna figure out a way. It makes me really annoying as a manager because, when my team says, "Oh, we couldn't do this," or "we can," I'm like, "Okay, wait a second. What do you mean you couldn't do it? Did you think about this? Did you think about that? What about this? What about that? What about," and I can the things just start coming at rapid fire. Um, so I love that. Like I think when it's got something that's either got, whether it's high stakes or it's like people have given up, other people have given up. It's almost like, okay, let me in, coach. I'm gonna figure this out. I love that.
I love that too. And I'm curious, what creation are you most proud of over the course of your life and career?
I think for sure, like my business is probably one of the things that's given me the most satisfaction. I had a narrative before I quit my job. I had worked for two other entrepreneurs and I'd run their businesses for them. And I had created a narrative for myself that was, well, I'm a good, kind of person to hire to run a business, but I would never be able to start a business from scratch. Like I just really didn't think that I had the tenacity, the sticking power to kind of build something from nothing. And I think, I'm 16 years into this journey now. I think, is it 16? Yeah, we'll be 16 years this December. And I'm kind of blown away by everything that we've done. Like we've had hundreds of people go through the programs. We've won countless awards for delivering impact, and I've had such great people work with me, both on my team and then as clients. That um, it's just been and it's been such a creative project, like down from like the things that you would think would be creative, like, oh, designing your logo and coming up with your website, but the creative of, how do we sell this a little differently, or how do we land this really huge client, or how do we, there's just so many avenues of, for me, creativity. And I think, I really see myself as the general manager. I don't see myself as the lead coach in my business. I've always sort of thought of myself as the general manager. And being a general manager is a really creative endeavor because you're dealing with the team and the culture, and you're dealing with the products and services and the marketing. And okay, the finance I could live without, but I got that going on as well, right? Finance and legal, with all due respect to, lawyers like yourself and other folks. It's not my thing. Um, but the rest of it, I really love it. And I particularly love, I think, the culture, like being able to, create a business and have people who come into my business comment on the fact that, um, you know, the team's really great. The vibe of our office is really, when people come into our office, they're always like, "Oh, this is just great space." And I always feel space reflects the energy of the people that are in the space. It sits within a space, and so that's been such a creative project for me. It's the longest time I've ever been employed by anybody.
I understand. I understand. And but I think that's great. I think it's important that we talk about how creative it is to start and run and keep running a business. It
Mhm.
is one series of endless problems which all require creative thinking. And I think it's important that we
Totally.
celebrate that as creativity, where often it's sort of sidelined as sort of something else.
I think being an
Um,
entrepreneur is um, a highly creative role. I think you're constantly looking to reinvent. I mean, COVID, I mean, boy, we had to think differently and get creative with how we were going to get ourselves through it. And and I had to get creative with how am I going to keep my team engaged. I mean, there was just so many problems that that presented us with, and
Mm.
and then just running a business. Like you're like, are you going to grow it? Or are you going to stay flat? I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine today. We were just talking about what our goals are for our business, and you just realize like you change, you evolve as a human being, what you want evolves. And then when you're a business owner, those things they don't operate distinct from each other. Your sort of life is changing. I'm at the point now where I have one child. She's 20 this month or next month in October. And so we're like at the empty nester stage of our life, right? We're looking down the barrel of an empty nest, and you start thinking, okay, so what does this life look like next? What's next for us? And so all of that is a creative process. I think it's highly creative, right?
Mm. No, I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thanks for thanks for talking with me about creativity today, because I have definitely taken a lot away from the fact that we're the same type, and seeing your journey obviously different to mine, but there's definitely things, I can see some of those points along the way. I'm like, oh, I didn't, I could have seen it that way, or how else can I, it's been great. So
Oh, no,
thank
it's
you.
fun to talk about. It was fun to talk about and think about, and actually, I have to say, thinking of creativity through that lens, I hadn't really thought about it through the lens of being the sevenness of creativity. And you've made me sort of recognize some of these pieces within myself. So it was actually really great to sort of articulate it out loud to somebody, co-create a better insight into
That's
my own
right.
creativity.
Co-creating.